Hello everyone, my name is Renee Bulusan. I'm currently enrolled at Urdaneta City University taking a Bachelor of Science in Accountancy fourth year student. Today, I will be sharing you what is FOB shipping point and FOB destination. Here are the objectives. At the end of the video, you are expected to first differentiate FOB shipping point and FOB destination. Next, understand accounting treatment for freight prepaid and freight collect. Lastly, you can prepare journal entries in buyer's books under different terms of purchase. Under Philippine Accounting Standard, Pass 2, inventories. Inventories are recognized when they met the definition of inventories, and they qualify for recognition as assets, such as when the entity obtains control over them. Control normally stems from legally enforceable right, ownership, or legal title, and normally passes to the buyer when he takes physical possession over the goods. However, the ownership is not always necessary for control to exist because control may precede, coincide with, or comes after the transfer of physical possession. An entity considers all relevant facts and circumstances in determining whether it has control, including the following. Let's focus on goods in transit. Goods in transit are goods already shipped by the seller but not yet received by the buyer. It may form part of the seller's or buyer's inventories depending on the sale term. We have FOB shipping point versus FOB destination. FOB means free on board, or in Tagalog is malaya ng maglayag. The term FOB goes back to the time of sailing ships, when freight was passed over the rail by hand. Once the goods were over the ship's rail, they shifted from the owner's to the buyer's responsibility. If the goods fell overboard, were damaged, they become the buyer's loss, not the seller's. To better understand, here is the scenario. I am the seller and I sell plants. I'm from Nueva Ecija, while the buyer is from Pangasinan. So, I will deliver the goods in the carrier. If the sale term is FOB shipping point, the ownership of that goods, for example plants, is at the point of shipment. While if the sale term is FOB destination, the ownership of that plant is transferred here at the point of the destination. Sale contracts may also contain terms of shipping cost, indicated by any of the following. Let's focus on freight prepaid and freight collect. I'll share you some techniques on how to record the freight. Don't forget that in the point of view of the buyer, we recognize freight in. Freight is always debited. While in the point of view of the seller recognizes freight out. It depends on if he or she paid it on cash, you will credit cash. If on account, you will credit accounts payable. Freight depends on the flow of inventory. For example, on the point of view of the seller, this arrow is the inventory. The inventory is going out. While in the point of view of the seller, the buyer, the inventory is coming in. So, freight in for the buyer and freight out for the seller. There will be no special accounting if the term of the sale is either FOB shipping point freight collect, because in FOB shipping point, the buyer owns the goods on the shipping point, and freight collect, the buyer shoulders the freight upon receiving the goods. So the buyer will recognize freight in and cash if he pays the freight on that specific date. While on FOB destination freight prepaid, the seller is still the owner of the goods, and he is also the one who pays for the freight charges. So the seller will recognize freight out and credit cash. In freight prepaid, the seller pays the freight in advance before the shipment. While in freight collect, the freight was not yet paid before the shipment. The courier will collect the freight from the buyer upon the delivery of the goods. As a rule, the entity who owns the goods being shipped should pay for the shipping costs. No special accounting is necessary if the term of the sales contract is either FOB shipping point freight collect or FOB destination freight prepaid, because the one who pays the freight charges are also the owner of the goods in transit. Special accounting arises when the term of the sale contract is either FOB shipping point freight prepaid or FOB destination freight collect. To better understand, let's take a look at this illustration. RJ Company purchased goods with invoice price of 10,000 pesos on account on December 31, 20x1. 100 pesos is the related shipping cost. The seller shipped the goods on the same day. On January 5, 20x2, RJ Company received the goods and settled the account on January 10, 20x2. Let's prepare the journal entries in the books of RJ Company under the different terms of purchases. First, FOB shipping point freight collect. To record the purchases on account, we will debit purchases amounting to 10,000 pesos and credit accounts payable since it is on account amounting to 10,000 pesos. And then on January 5, 20x2, to record the payment of freight to the courier, we will debit freight in 100 pesos and credit cash 100 pesos. And on January 10, 20x2, the date of settlement of accounts payable, we will debit accounts payable 10,000 pesos and credit cash 10,000 pesos. The buyer recognizes freight in because the buyer is the one who's supposed to pay for the freight. Under FOB shipping point, the buyer owns the goods in transit, therefore the buyer shoulders the freight. Freight is included as cost of the inventories purchased. Next, FOB destination freight prepaid. On December 31, 20x1, there will no entry. However, on January 5, 20x2, to record the purchases on account, we will debit purchases 10,000 pesos and accounts payable 10,000 pesos. On January 10, 20x2, to record the settlement of accounts payable, we will debit accounts payable 10,000 pesos and we will credit cash 10,000 pesos. The buyer does not recognize freight in because the seller is the one who is supposed to pay for the freight. Under FOB destination, the seller owns the goods in transit. Then, FOB shipping point freight prepaid. To record purchases and freight in, the reimbursable of the seller, we will debit purchases 10,000 pesos and credit freight in. Since in freight prepaid, the seller pays the freight, but the buyer is supposed to pay for the freight. So we will debit 100 pesos. And credit accounts payable amounting to 10,100 pesos. On January 5, 20X due, there will no entry. While to record the settlement of accounts payable, inclusive of reimbursement for freight on January 10, 20X2, we will debit accounts payable 10,100. It's 100. And credit cash 10,100 pesos. In here, the seller already paid the freight. The freight in is recorded as an increase in accounts payable because the buyer will reimburse the seller for the freight. Lastly, FOB destination freight collect. On December 31, 20X1, there will no entry. While on January 5, 20X2, to record purchases on account, we will debit purchases 10,000 pesos and credit accounts payable 10,000 pesos. To record freight paid on behalf of the seller, we will debit accounts payable, it's a deduction, 100 pesos, and credit cash, since the buyer pays the freight in freight collect. On January 10, 20X2, to record the settlement of accounts payable, net of freight paid on behalf of the seller, we will debit accounts payable 9,900 pesos and credit cash 9,900 pesos. The buyer does not recognize freight in because the seller is the one who is supposed to pay for the freight.